Welcome here. A reflection on Epiphany, Theophany, and the magic of the Magi. Looking always for the deep truth of God's life in you, your life in God. Epiphany is described in the Merriam-Webster dictionary as a usually sudden manifestation, perception of the essential nature or meaning of something, an intuitive grasp of reality through something such as an event, usually simple and striking, and an illuminating discovery, realization, or disclosure. They define theophany as a visible manifestation of a deity. When it comes to epiphany and theophany in Christianity, this distinction that is drawn rather muddies than clears the understanding. The most famous theophany is Moses at the burning bush, and the most famous epiphany is described as the Magi reaching at last the infant Christ with Mary there. The Magi were followers of Zarathustra, the first monotheistic religion the world knows, established about 1,000 years before Christ. And their God is called Wise Spirit, or Spirit of Wisdom. They were intrigued and set up a system of the 4 elements. They were interested in alchemy, purifying and perfecting certain materials. We hear a reference to this practice in the Gospels, the refiner's fire. They followed the threefold path: good thought, good words, and good action. They believed in the spiritual equality of men and women, and they banned slavery. They also believed that dogs showed special spiritual virtues, and you've got to love that. In biblical material, we have reference to a few of them, a few practices of Zoroastrianism: Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar, Darius the Great, and importantly Cyrus the Great, who freed the captives from Babylon and allowed the Jews to return to their home and to Jerusalem. So moving across from Persia to visit the Christ child would have been a long journey, certainly, and would have presented some difficulties for the wise people, the Magi. But they felt it worth their while. They were followers of astrology and astronomy, which were not distinct at that time. They were well-educated, sophisticated people, and whose essence was gentle. So no wonder that they followed that star to find what was happening amongst the Jewish people that had been shown by this portent in the skies. In the understanding of the Magi in the Christian tradition, it's often described as the Magi coming to see the Christ, and at that point the Epiphany is there. It's at that point that they have the realization, when they're face to face with the child. And I think it's certainly true that face to face with an infant child, there is something profound in that you yourself may know through children you've known or children of your own. And also just casually seeing children around the place, there is something arresting, compelling, pure and beautiful about them. And for this child particularly, because of the portent, we can expect that they were particularly moved. But we must recognize as well that they had a pre-existing faith in God and a dedication. We're talking about Magi, so very well educated and deeply religious leaders. In the Theophany of Moses at the burning bush, we see that Moses recognizes God's presence and hears God's voice as he is arrested by this extraordinary vision. It may be very well that the burning effect, the image that he was seeing, he had seen before and passed by. But certainly this is a particular occasion, and it gives rise to a whole chain of events in history, many of which are recorded in great detail. For Moses, also a monotheist, he understands God's presence everywhere, and a follower of Abram, he understands this nature of God to be available to human people. The difference between the Epiphany and Theophany is really one of where you line yourself up to look at it. And the two words are really not different in their application in religion, except that Epiphany is used outside religion. You can have epiphanies that are highly secular. What then is there for us to grasp from this visit of the Magi, or this Theophany of Moses? In both cases, these are people who have an interest, a deep interest in the nature of God, who are already alive to the fact that God is present, if only through teaching and hearing the stories, perhaps in Moses' case, rather than necessarily his own personal experience. We don't know. What we do know is that Moses had to hide his face from the people when he had been off meditating and praying, contemplating, usually up a high mountain. Because the people believed that you cannot see the face of God and live. And there's a version of this inverted that is widely believed. You cannot see God until you die. But the Magi give us another view, that you can see God and live. And Jesus will tell us that really, to be fully alive, we need to be open to God's presence constantly. We are advised to pray continually and in everything give thanks. So this easy opening to God is straightforward, always available, but somehow with the busyness of the mind, it's easy to conform one's thinking to the reality, the deep reality being actually the ephemeral forms, the things that will come and go in the mind, thoughts and ideas, but also in creation, the constant movement of creation, the coming and going of people and things, as opposed to the unchangeable, which is the presence of God. In both the Epiphany of the Magi and in Moses, we see people who have prepared their hearts by study, yes, by reading, probably, by talking to others who have experiences and know things, but finally in the operation in their own heart, the opening up and the letting go. And this is the ultimate purification or alchemy, to allow ourselves to be in a constant state of God's presence, not short periodic bursts. So undoubtedly you have had your own epiphanies and theophanies, and possibly many of them, and most pressure is brought to bear on the idea that those are small things that must be somewhat buried, as in not talked about too publicly, and certainly not the deep reality, the short glimpse into God's presence, rather than the deep understanding of God's continual presence. For those who live in the deep presence, the understanding is often called bliss or happiness or peace, and there is a sense of love and deep truth, the only truth that comes through that. So how to affect that? Partly by pursuing a route like the Magi. Study, practice, worship, but also journey out of one's comfort zone, responsive to the natural world, and a sort of open intrigue that we also see in Moses. Each little step brings us nearer. For this we need some quiet and some solitude, and to use those times not to get distracted by the other way of thinking, but to fall into a deep quiet. Thomas Merton says, "If you seek, follow my ways and I will lead you to golden-haired suns, logos and music, blameless joys, innocent of questions and beyond answers. For I, solitude, am thine own self, I, nothingness, am thy all, I, silence, am thy Amen." And an excerpt from Granum Synopsis. It's anonymous. Become as a child, become deaf, become blind. Your own substance must become nothingness. Drive all substance, all nothingness far from you. Leave space, leave time. Eschew also all physical representation. Go without a way, the narrow footpath. Then you will succeed in finding the desert. O my soul, go out, let God in. Sink my entire being into God's nothingness. Sink into the bottomless flood. If I flee from you, you come to me. If I lose myself, I find you, O goodness extending over all being. So we follow that star. We are transfixed by beauty and children. We notice, stop, and open ourselves to burning bushes. And like Brother Roger, we find that in the quotidian, in the peeling of potatoes, in the casual conversation. And so are alchemized into our true nature.